All right, everybody. I'm glad to be back with you again. This is Michael Voss, the Dragon of the Southern Tier. I'm happy to have you back with me at the No Soundbites Allowed podcast on the Exceptional Conservative Network. That's right, that's TECN TV. And please don't forget, we have some of our other co hosts on the channel. They're in Italy, in the United States military, even a couple of evangelists down in Africa on the channel, on the program. Do check out the notes on the description for this on YouTube or on Facebook, and you'll see some of the other programs. I do also want to remind people on the 28th of April, I will be speaking at Binghamton University at 2 p.m. This is open to the public. It is open to the media. This is part of the Liberty Weekend, which is being brought to the public by the Binghamton University College Libertarians, the Binghamton University College Republicans, to talk about everything that affects us here. I hope you're going to be able to make it. I look forward to you being there throughout the entire weekend, and definitely during my speech. And afterwards, I'll be doing a quick Q&A with everyone to talk about the issues affecting us in the Second Amendment. And speaking of the Second Amendment, I want to bring up our guest. That is Dan Wos, who is the author of Good Gun, Bad Guy. He's a nationally renowned author and speaker on the Second Amendment. And I just want to double check. Dan, you can hear us, yes? Dan? Oh.
Hey, Michael, I can hear you. Yes.
Okay.
How are you? Sorry about that.
That's all right. I thought it was my system for a second there. Okay.
It's a little low. I can barely hear you, but I can hear you.
All right. I'll try and up that a little bit on my side and try and improve that. I was also not talking directly into the mic. Is that better?
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, okay.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I wasn't talking directly into the mic for a moment there. And I want everyone to know, by the way, Dan is a native of New York. He's in Saratoga Springs. You can see him on Facebook under his name. It's spelled W-O-S, although it's pronounced Was. Is that correct?
That's right, Was.
Yeah. So it's a little different in the spelling than the way it's pronounced. So if you're looking him up, remember it's W-O-S, or just look up Good Gun, Bad Guy, and you'll find him immediately. And let me start off first of all. I think one of the big questions a lot of people would have who may not be familiar with you is, Dan, what brought you to write the book and to be an advocate of the Second Amendment?
Well, that's an interesting question. I'll bring you way back to the beginning, but I'll do it in bullet points so it's quick. I was raised in a pro-gun family. My dad taught me to shoot and hunting, target shooting, and stuff like that. So I was familiar with guns when I was a kid. But I was in my 20s after my dad died. I started, as I say, hanging with the wrong crowd. And it wasn't drug dealers and bank robbers. It was anti-gun liberal types. And what happened was I started to fall prey to that whole narrative, that whole, you know how they say we become our environment. And I started to fall into that whole thing where guns are bad, we don't need them, they should be restricted, and all this stuff. It wasn't until I started to get a little older and I realized that it wasn't true. I had a lot of conflicting beliefs because I had great experiences with my dad when we'd go shooting. And I knew guns were safe when they're used properly. But then I had people in my ear, telling me how bad it was. And it was part of that peer pressure, that group think kind of thing that was very conflicting for me. And then what really turned me around was my wife and I had a situation coming out of a late-night movie theater with this guy, and I tell the story in detail in Good Gun, Bad Guy. But that completely turned me around, and it made me realize that, the most important thing to me is my wife and my son, and if I can't protect them, then I'm not doing my job as a man, as a husband, as a father. So that night I told my wife, I said, I'm getting a gun. And from there, I told that story. I wrote that story, and it got picked up by a bunch of websites. It's called "The Fear of Guns." People can search that story. But that ended up being started to be the first chapter of the book, and then it just kept going. The book wrote itself, and then I started learning how manipulative the media is, and how easily convinced people are, or they can be, when it comes to the gun narrative, and how they, their thought process has really changed. And they're taught to fear guns, they're taught to hate gun owners, and once they get you scared enough, you'll vote for the person who says that they're promised to take those scary guns away, and that's really what they want. So the mindset and the manipulation, the propaganda, the rhetoric that's out there about guns is all wrong, and it's used on people for a very specific reason.
Well, you bring up two really great points that I want to address and before we get into the meat and potatoes of what's going on with 2020 and gun control that we're seeing sweeping the nation, and red flags especially. But one of the things you mentioned is about how the mindset is so strongly locked in amongst many liberals, many progressives, and the Democratic Party overall. It reminds me, and I was talking in the prior segment, you may have not seen this yet. Today, Newsweek mentioned that Nancy Pelosi, she was at an event, and she's mentioning that Democrats, they vote for anything with a D behind it. It could be a glass of water, and they would vote for it. They would vote it in. And she was disparaging Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, but I think that has a lot to say about gun control that we see both in New York State and across the country. What do you think?
Yeah, it's the same concept. It's a groupthink kind of thing, and it's a team sport. So what that means is that once you're on that team, or once you're sitting at that Democrat popular table, you have to eat from that menu. And if you don't, you will get shunned, and you'll get kicked out of the popular table. It's kind of that. You remember the popular table in middle school? You had to live by those rules, and that's what happens on the Democrat on the Democrat side.
I think so.
And it's easy to manipulate those people into that position, because people on the left tend to want to live a more structured, government-controlled environment. They like that laws and rules and regulations because they feel safer in that environment. Whereas, conservatives are basically like, get the hell out of my way. I'll do what I want when I want, and I'll think the way I want to think, and nobody's going to tell me what to do. I'll pay for my mistakes, and I will reap my rewards. So it's a difference between living in a controlled, government-controlled utopian society that they want, or freedom. And the way I look at it is, I don't necessarily think Democrats want to control you as much as they want to be controlled, most of them. But they can't do that if conservative-minded people are running around with all their freedom and guns to protect that freedom. So it turns into a kind of a team sport. So you put a D behind anyone's name, they're going to vote for it because they need to be part of that group.
Well, that seems to fit into what we're seeing nowadays with the identity and gender politics, what I like to call the micro-categorization of the public. You're not important as an individual. You're only important as the group you plug into, and you can't get out of that. Otherwise, you're ostracized, you're demonized, and you're thrown away, which I think is one of the overriding problems, which also leads to things like what we're seeing here in New York State, the abortion until birth, if not post-birth, and of course, more in the subject that we both are familiar with, red flag laws and the gun control, like the Safe Storage Act, and even the proposal by State Senator Kevin Parker last year that you have to give away your Fourth Amendment to be able to get your Second Amendment, the social media password bill. So, and I know I just threw out a lot of subjects there, but let's look at the red flag bill, especially since it's going into the nation. I'm sure you're familiar with it. What do you think of that?
Well, red flag laws, I don't know how many states now are doing it, 14 or 15 states now.
15.
The New York, well, I'll talk about Maryland first. In Maryland, Gary Willis was killed because of it. I don't know if you're familiar with Gary Willis, but he had banging on his door 5 o'clock in the morning, and he went to his door with his gun. Well, what would you do, right? If somebody's banging on your door at 5 o'clock in the morning, you'd probably do the same thing.
Oh, yeah.
Well, a scuffle happened at the door, and he ended up getting killed because of a red flag law that allowed those police officers to go to his house in the attempt of confiscating his guns, all based on hearsay from a family member who called the police and said that Gary was a risk or a danger of some sort. They had a disagreement, so she went to the cops. Now all of a sudden the cops are at Gary's door wanting to take his guns without due process. So that's what happened in Maryland. In New York, our law, our red flag law, or our extreme risk protection order, however they like to call it, make it look nice, really what it says in there is that school officials, certified school officials, and that means a substitute teacher, it could mean a teacher's assistant, anybody can determine whether or not little Johnny is a risk of some sort or danger to society. Well, next thing you know, the cops are going to Big Johnny's house and taking his guns. And this is, the red flag laws violate due process, and they violate the Second, Fourth, and Fifth Amendments. And there's a thing called, let me add one more thing, Michael. Sorry, I might be going a little long on
You're
here.
fine.
H.R. 5717 is a federal attempt at influencing states to get on board with these laws. The H.R. 5717, I can't find it handy, but it basically says, H.R. 5717, it says to authorize the Attorney General to make grants to states that have in place laws that authorize the seizure of firearms from dangerous individuals and for other purposes. In other words, they want to pass this law to give money to states for getting on board with these red flag laws. That's dangerous.
Oh, I agree. And it's very similar to what they did in 2014, where they started, the government authorized and is paying people to be put onto the NICS listing. And that was a big thing. And a lot of people don't realize the government, New York State, gets paid to put people on a list that takes away their ability to get a firearm, amongst other things. And no one's told about that. So I agree with you. And one of the things that really, I don't know if you know this, in the red flag law, besides breaking the Second, Fourth, Fifth Amendments, 15th Amendment, it's also a violation of the Eighth Amendment with the cruel and unusual punishment because no crime is committed. And
right.
The big thing that, here's the thing that I found out when I did my research. I don't know if you've heard about this or if anyone else has mentioned it around the nation. Because almost every state has a Child Protective Services, a CPS, it is a mandate that if you have, once this red flag action, this ERPO has been done, the state has to take your children, if they exist in the household, because you're too dangerous. And no state actually keeps a record. I've subpoenaed, did a FOIA for Connecticut, Indiana, a couple of states trying to find this. No one tracks it, but it is a requirement of the state because of the red flag. Did you know that?
Wow, no, I didn't know that, and that's really frightening. I did a little video on YouTube called "Red Flag Laws Kill." If people want to watch that, and so here's the good news. People, gun owners, and logical thinking people are becoming aware of this now. And we're getting angry, and we're starting to try to figure out what we're going to do about it. And I think what's going to happen is one of these cases is going to end up going to the Supreme Court. And it's got to, because we need to fight this back. We can't accept this. We absolutely cannot accept this, not only as gun owners, not only as, conservative or Republicans, but as American citizens.
Yeah.
This violates the entire, premise of the Bill of Rights. So we can't accept it. We will fight it back. I just don't know how long that's going to take, and I don't know how many people are going to die in the process.
And that's a very serious concern, because if it's happened once, it's going to happen again. And given how they do these, They almost always do these actions at between 5 and 7 a.m. And there have been incidents before in other states, Washington, Colorado, a couple of others, I believe, where there have been tussles because they think someone's breaking in. It's going to happen again.
Yeah.
But that brings up a good question. More people are becoming aware. Gun owners need to be active, whether you're Democrat, conservative, libertarian, Republican, doesn't matter. And people who are concerned about their rights. But in the 2020 presidential election, we are seeing actively and they're all leaning to the left, or running to the far left, really. But they're coming out and saying, you know what, we're going to take away guns, essentially. They're saying we want more gun control. We want to take away, even though 99.99% of the 160 million gun owners in the nation are not a problem, have never been a problem, they want to take away those rights. What do you see happening with the 2020?
Well, you can't count on any Democrats to defend the Second Amendment. I certainly haven't seen any. And, you know, they really are the party that wants more government, more control over the people. So I'm assuming that the people listening to this show right now are not, I mean, the majority are not Democrat voters. So
Probably.
I feel like I'm probably speaking to the choir. Am I? I don't know. Tell me if I'm wrong.
Mostly.
Okay. So, but my point is that regardless of whether you're a Democrat listening or a Republican, you're not going to get freedom by voting Democrat. They're all going to want to take away gun rights, and they want to restrict, you know, your speech, and they want control over you. And so I don't see any of them as ever an option for me if I want to live as a free person in this country. With traditional anything that resembles traditional American values. There is one in particular that's extremely heinous to me, and will do terrible damage to the Second Amendment in particular, and that's Eric Swalwell.
Oh yes.
If you listen to this guy, he really does want to. He lives and breathes this gun ban stuff. So he really does want to do this, and I wouldn't be surprised if he ever became president, he would do executive orders all over the place. So I wouldn't trust Eric Swalwell as far as I could throw him with defending the Second Amendment.
No,
so they're all scary, but he's a terror. So that's my thought on Democrats. I would never in a million years vote for any of them.
No, I agree. They all have so many issues, and this is just one of them, but one that's a deep concern because of the consequences. And I think that's the big thing. No one's talking about what's the consequence, kind of like with taking the kids with the red flag.
Right.
No one talks about it, and then it's too late. Until
well, yeah, and
election.
you know what? Because people don't think when they vote, they think instantly. Like. Right now, how is this going to affect me right now? But they don't think about their kids and their grandkids and their great-grandkids and how the decisions that we make now are going to affect them. If we continue to allow this abuse of the Second Amendment and the First Amendment, and the First Amendment is becoming an issue too. So if we allow this to get by without pushing back on it, our great-grandkids and our grandkids are going to say, what the heck were you guys thinking? Why didn't you had freedom of speech, freedom to protect yourselves. You had it in your hands. Why did you let it go? Why didn't you fight for it? And I don't want to be responsible for that. I don't want my grandkids saying, hey, Grandpa, the hell's wrong with you? What are you doing? What'd you do? Why didn't you fight harder? So here I am in 2019, and I have to do whatever I can. And I suggest that anybody listening does the same thing. We need to protect our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, and we need to let the people who want to take those rights away from us know that we're not going to let it happen.
Oh, I agree completely. Let me ask you, I know many people, whether it's on Facebook or any kind of social media, even in person for someone like myself, I think for yourself, we get a lot of people who come at us and try to silence us. I don't know if you've had that.
Sure.
And what would you say to people when they're having a conversation with their friend, family members? Because I know we encounter it, and we're the big vocal voices for a lot of people, I think. But I think regular people need to hear what's a way for them to deal with that. What would you suggest?
Are we talking specifically about the gun conversation?
Well, yes, that, and but it kind of plays into everything else too. It's just one of the
Sure.
hot
Okay.
buttons.
Well, I think what I've learned is that when people have views that go against our rights, they tend to not see the logic behind it. So what I like to do is I like to try to show them the logical piece, and then clearly also show them the way they see it, so they can see the contrast between their illogical view on the topic and they can see the logical perspective of it. So, for instance, when people say that we need more gun restrictions, it helps them understand when you can draw that contrast out. So what I'll say is something like, okay, so you want more gun restrictions because you think it's going to save lives. Well, on one hand, we have criminals who want to kill people. Okay, can you envision that? You got a person who wants to kill people. And then on the other hand, you're offering something like maybe a magazine capacity restriction or a bump stock ban or whatever gun restriction du jour,
Right.
So then I'll say, do you, Mr. or Mrs. Anti-Gunner, do you really expect intelligent people to believe that someone who is willing to kill in cold blood will not exceed a bullet limit? And if you can show them that perspective like that, and you can show them how their illogical thought process doesn't match up with reality, in other words, it's like saying, okay, so what's a killer going to say? Well, I was going to kill a bunch of people today, but my bump stock is illegal, so I don't know, I think I'll stay home and do the laundry.
Yeah.
It's helping them see how illogical their thought process is, and that's what that's the only way to really do it. They're really locked in, though, so it's very difficult. So that we can help some of them, but many we have to defeat. So.
Well, many are like what Nancy Pelosi has said. They're going to go straight down the line and never think about it. But I think it's important. And I think you had a great article. You were recently had an article out where you were comparing one of the reasons to have a firearm is to defend your home. And if someone's breaking into your house with a firearm, they're trying to, for whatever reason, they're breaking into the home. You have a baseball bat, they have a gun. You can reach 2 feet, that person reaches 25 yards. What's going to be more effective? And
well, right.
I thought that was a really good point you made there in that article.
Well, and the reason I wrote that is because in their perspective, they don't see that contrast. They don't see it because they're so convinced that guns need to go away, and we don't need guns because I have a baseball bat, or I actually have a friend who said he has a 9-iron. He's going to use his 9-iron. I'm like, are you kidding me? Really? What are you going to do? Play golf with the guy? So they don't get it because their brains. When we have beliefs, strong beliefs about something, no matter what it could be guns or anything else, we tend to want to reject anything that contradicts our existing belief. These people have been convinced that guns are bad and dangerous and need to go away. So anything that comes at them that contradicts that belief, they will disregard it. Subconsciously, they just won't hear it. They won't comprehend it. So we have to help them see the difference. Okay, so you really think that a baseball bat is going to help you if someone is coming into your house with a gun? Are you serious? And then you show them the perspective again. You have a radius swing of about 6 feet with that baseball bat. What are you going to do with that? And you try to help them. And some of them will go, yeah, I guess you're right. Some of them will say, well, nobody needs assault weapons. They'll change the subject and they'll go on their merry way, holding on to their existing, illogical belief.
I get that all the time. Many people, for me, always wind up just stopping because I have done a lot of research like yourself, and I do a lot of reading of stats. And once he mentioned that, it's like, have you looked at the New York GIVE report? What? They don't even know it exists. It's like, or have you looked at the death rate, the number of deaths in Chicago, which is 97 at the moment, the number of people shot, 491, and remind them that they have every gun control law that's ever been mentioned in the nation, and it doesn't work. And then they walk away. It's what can you do? And we have about 2 minutes, but let me ask, because we have 2 minutes, I always like to ask, is there something, I know we've talked about a bunch of things here, and I do thank you, you're a wealth of information. What is it that you, if there's anything else that you would want to mention to people, what should they be thinking of?
Well, I think people should be aware that there is a group of anti-Second Amendment radicals in Congress, in the media, and what they try to do is manipulate the thought process of people who aren't paying attention. And they do that by using fear and hate, the strongest human emotions. They will use fear, the fear of guns, teach people over and over and over to fear guns. That's why after a shooting, they bring the AR-15 across the TV screen. So the fear of guns keeps people away from the range, keeps them away from learning. Then they like to build an anger toward gun owners. This is why the left is so hateful toward the NRA and so hateful toward gun owners, because they're taught to be that way. So what they're doing is they're using, the anti-second radicals are using the anti-gunners and the people on the left, they're using their own emotions against them. And if we can at least recognize that much, we can see what's going on and we can understand why they act the way they do with respect to guns.
I think that's an important distinction there. Oops, hit the wrong button. Sorry about that. I think you're right. We have to wake people up and think of consequences, think of the emotional manipulation that's going on, especially after something happens. It's always that same process.
Right.
I look forward. I would love to have you back on again. Let's do
it. Yeah, anytime.
We definitely didn't have enough time to. There's so much. You have such a wealth of information, and I love talking about this. So I definitely want to have you back on, and we can talk longer next time.
Sure thing.
Really get into it. But folks, I want you to remember this has been Dan Wos, and he is the author of Good Gun, Bad Guy, and please check out also the Fear of Guns, as he had mentioned. Check him out. He's on Facebook. You'll see him around the nation, and we look forward to speaking with him again. And I know it's the end of the show, so I want to thank you for being here with me on No Soundbites Allowed on the Exceptional Conservative Network. We will have him back. You will be back, and we'll talk some more on Thursday at 1 p.m. Thank you, folks.